10 things to know for the AP Stats exam. The following 10 things are compiled from a variety of resources, other teachers, the College Board, previously released exams, and my experience with what I've seen through the last 8 years. Number 10 is to say what you mean. This is referring to free response questions on the exam. You want to use proper vocabulary in the correct way. So if you're not sure what vocabulary to use, don't just throw them in, but explain instead. If you use the vocabulary term incorrectly, it can count against you and it can drop your score. When you are using notation, variables, things like that, if you aren't sure which one to use, just write out the word instead. Show all your work on your free response questions. Do not just refer to using the calculator, and I'll come back to this in a later point. If it's referring to a probability question, it's good to write out both the fraction and decimal answer. Parameters should be explicitly defined about the population and not the sample when you're doing a hypothesis test. When you are writing your hypotheses out, you should always be defining those variables and it should refer to the population. Avoid using the word confounding, biased, or skewed as a synonym for bad. That would be the incorrect usage of those vocabulary terms. It's actually recommended not to even use the term confounding or lurking variables at all. Many students will confuse these two terms or use them incorrectly, and your score will be reduced if you use vocab terms incorrectly. So these are just a couple of examples of that. Number 9, pacing on the exam. Your AP exam will have 2 parts, multiple choice and free response, and each part you're given 90 minutes. The tests that you've completed during the course are set up the same way as the AP exam is, so you should be somewhat used to the pacing. In the multiple choice part, it's recommended that you take 2 minutes per question, and that will give you 10 minutes at the end to check your work. Make sure that you answer every question in the multiple choice. A wrong answer counts the same as an unanswered question. So if you're not sure, see if you can narrow down your answer choices and then guess from there. For the free response, you have 90 minutes for all 6 questions. There is not a break between question number 5 and 6. You can do them in any order. It's recommended, though, that you start with number 1. It's usually the easiest question, and then from there, scan through 2 through 6 and work them out in the order that you choose, that you think you'll be able to complete the quickest. Leave yourself enough time to at least attempt number 6. Number 6 is worth 12.5% of the entire test. That includes both parts. So you don't want to completely ignore it. It is also the most difficult question, so you may not be able to answer all parts, but you should be able to at least answer part of it. It is possible to score a 0 on a free response question. Just attempting it does not guarantee a 1. Based on the last 5 years of released free response questions, I have seen that there are typically at least 2 of the questions, 2 full questions that will be on topics 1 and 4. So as a reminder, topic 1 is exploring data and topic 4 is inference. There usually is 1 full question on a hypothesis test and 1 full question on a confidence interval. The type of test and interval, though, changes each year, so you don't know which one you're going to get. Number 8, know and use your calculator. In preparation for it, I would recommend making sure that you have fresh batteries and you reset the calculator, but then turn diagnostics on, so it's all set and ready to go. On the free response part, as a reminder, you do not want to use calculator speak, so you want to be able to show your work. However, if you are running out of time, go ahead and write the answer down from the calculator, and then you can always come back in and fill in the work if you have time. Review all of those functions that we have learned through the year. If you go back to your textbook in each chapter, there are some TI tips in there on how to use every single function in the calculator. And I would recommend that you use the calculator on the multiple choice part to save you a lot of time, since you don't need to show your work anyway. So number 7 is knowing how to name that test. You can practice this. I have posted a page in Schoology. This was posted in Module 12. You may have seen it, called Which Type of Test. You can go back to that. There's a website that gives you a lot of practice with naming those tests. And then from there, review the steps on how to complete that test or interval. Since they are similar, you may not have to study every part, but you do want to go over the differences between those steps. So again, there's likely 2 problems on the free response that involves a hypothesis test and an interval. Number 6 is to know the 4-step process. This goes along with intervals and testing. In the textbook, those 4 steps are called hypotheses, model, mechanics, and conclusion. Other textbooks will use state, plan, do, or conclude. The next 2 bulleted items here are some acronyms that I have seen recently, and it's broken down even more. So each letter stands for a step that you need to make sure that you include, which is why it has more than 4. So for intervals, you can remember using the word panic. So it stands for parameter, assumptions, name the test, interval, and conclusion. For tests, you can remember the word phantoms, which stands for parameter, hypotheses, assumptions, name that test, test statistic, obtain the p-value, make a decision, and state the conclusion. And so those 2 acronyms break down that process a little bit more, especially if you tend to forget some of those steps. When you're writing the conclusion, remember not to accept the null. You either reject the null or you fail to reject the null, and then you want to interpret that in context. When you're interpreting, though, you do not want to interpret the p-value or the confidence level unless you're asked specifically to do that. Interpreting the p-value is when you explain that the p-value stands for the probability of the sample statistic occurring given that the null is true. And interpreting the confidence level is when you say that if many random samples are taken, then X% of those would result in an interval that contains the true value of whatever it is you're talking about. So those things do not need to be included in your conclusion, and it actually should not be, just in case you do it incorrectly, unless the problem asks you specifically to do that. Number 5, when you're writing, be clear, concise, and in context. Say what you're trying to say, and then stop. So you don't want to just throw in extra words in there, but you do want to write in context using appropriate units. Extra wording with a long paragraph will not help you. It actually makes the graders have to read everything that you're saying, and if you say it incorrectly or wrong or it's not needed, then your answer can be docked. If you do make a mistake, cross it off with 1 line so you can still see it, and you can erase it in case it does happen to be correct. Also, this helps you because if the grader sees what you wrote, and it's on the right track, they can actually use that to help bump up a half score. When you're asked to compare distributions, make sure that you use comparative language, such as higher, lower, the same as, instead of just listing the characteristics. Be explicit when you're answering questions, using previous parts to it. Don't assume that the reader will go back and look. And if you're asked to make a choice between 2 options, justify the choice that you made, but also why the other option is not good. Do not use ditto marks on the exam. In the class, it's okay. On the exam, don't do it. And those of you know who you are if you have messy handwriting, but try to take a little bit more time to write neater on the AP exam. You don't want to make it difficult for those grading your exams to read what you're trying to write. And avoid parallel solutions because you'll be graded on the weakest response. So that means trying to give 2 different ways to answer the same question, unless you're asked to do so. So number 4 is to read the question and answer the question. And some good tips are to underline your key pieces of information, and when you're done, go back and read again what you were asked to do to make sure that you have answered it. And when you're reading the question, don't argue with the writers, believe what they wrote. Number 3 is to review the formulas and tables, how to use them. Make sure you know which formulas are given so you don't try to memorize them. Know how to use the tables. However, if you haven't been using the tables, that's fine. The calculator is perfectly fine. So just review all of those functions. Number 2, check yourself. Does your answer make sense? Is it written in the context of the problem? And did you answer the question and all parts to the question? And then lastly, number 1, the night before, make sure that you sleep well. Don't cram so much that you don't get enough sleep. Because the test is in the afternoon, eat a good breakfast and lunch. And again, reset your calculator beforehand. Make sure your diagnostics is turned on so it's all ready to go, and have fresh batteries in your calculator. So good luck. You got this. You know you can do it. And then right after this, I'm going to go over an overview of the last 5 years released free response parts of the test. So here it is on the screen. It's a lot of information. You can pause this if you want to read it more. But based on what I saw, and this is broken down per question per year and what topic was covered, you can see that every single topic is included in the test. And some questions will cover more than one topic. With topic 4 and 1 is where I see the most. So again, 4 is on inference and 1 is on looking at data, but it also includes regression. There's also always a question on probability, and sometimes you'll even see 2 questions that have probability. But the topic that I saw the least information on was topic 2, and this includes experiments, studies, simulations, etc. So if that's your weakest topic, then don't worry about that. But as you can see, every single year there's always a question on testing. Matched pairs, 2 proportion, chi-square, this one has chi-square, and 2 sample t-tests. So they seem to change around, not necessarily the same as from the previous years. And then there's also something that involves an interval. Usually that test, the question that involves the test, is a full and complete test, and that's the only thing they're asking you, is what I've seen. So I hope this has helped you. Please let me know if you have any questions, and maybe take the time to watch this video a second time. Good luck, guys.